Good morning, everyone. It is about 8:32 in the morning, February 2nd. I have another good article from Michael Thunder Phillips. It's called The Friendly Parent Trap. How cooperation becomes punishment. Okay? Here's the article here on Substack. You can find him on Substack, Michael Thunder Phillips. He's also been on my podcast, Slam the Gavel. You can find that on YouTube and all major platforms. Okay, here we go. After litigation spirals, credibility wars, and alienation claims, many family court cases converge on a single metric that quietly decides outcomes. Which parent appears more friendly? On its face, the idea seems reasonable. Courts want parents to support a child's relationship with both sides. Cooperation sounds healthy. Encouraging contact sounds child-centered. But in practice, the friendly parent factor has become one of the most dangerous traps in family court, especially in cases involving abuse, coercive control, or legitimate safety concerns. What the friendly parent role is supposed to do. Most states include some version of the friendly parent provision in their best interest statutes. The intent is simple. Reward parents who facilitate contact. I'm going to add to that because that can backfire on a parent. And I have seen that happen. And I have had Maryann Petri on my podcast multiple times, as well as Natalia Dalton. And these people facilitate contact with the other parent, and it has totally backfired. But they are also dealing with a personality disorder. Okay, you want to discourage interference and gatekeeping. And you want to promote co-parenting after separation. Okay, so that's good. Okay, in low conflict cases, it can work, which means, and I'll add to that, it means that parents that don't have personality disorders, okay, they can promote co-parenting after separation, which in my case we did for 10 years until all hell broke loose. In a high conflict or abuse adjacent cases, it can be catastrophic. I'll add to that. That is when you have the personality disorders. That makes it, they call it high conflict, and I will give my opinion that it's not high conflict. It's dealing with personality disorders, okay? So when safety looks like unfriendliness, the trap is sprung the moment a parent limits contact due to concern for a child's safety. What the parent is doing is asking for supervision, seeking temporary restrictions, documenting incidents, following professional advice. Okay, I can add to that, but let me make sure I've got this all right here. Responding to a child's fear or distress, and how the court may interpret all this as uncooperative, controlling, escalating conflict, undermining the other parent, and not child-focused, okay? The protective action becomes evidence against the protective parent. It says he writes the protector. Okay. So this whole trap thing is sprung the moment a parent limits contact due to concerns for a child's safety. Does everyone get that or understand it? You can find Michael Thunder Phillips, his article is on Substack. So let me continue. The catch-22 no one explains. Okay, here we go. The catch-22 no one explains. Parents quickly learn the impossible position they've been placed in. Allow contact despite fear and retain custody credibility. restrict contact to protect the child, or risk losing custody. Courts rarely frame it this bluntly, but the message is consistent. You can raise concerns as long as you don't act on them. This is not a neutral standard. It punishes risk-averse parenting and rewards compliance. And that's the game they all play. Everybody has to comply. And that's at the best interest of the child, I might add. Okay. Who the trap hits the hardest? The friendly parent trap disproportionately harms survivors of domestic violence or coercive control, parents of traumatized children, parents following therapists or pediatric guidance, parents with disabilities or communication differences, parents without aggressive legal counsel. Those who document, advocate, or insist on boundaries often appear difficult next to a parent who simply agrees to everything on paper. To see how all this plays out? Hardest. The friendly parent trap disproportionately harms survivors of domestic violence or coercive control, parents of traumatized children, parents following therapist or pediatric guidance, parents with disabilities or communication differences, parents without aggressive legal counsel. Those who document, advocate, or insist on boundaries often appear difficult next to the parent who simply agrees to everything on paper. Okay, he continues. You can find this article on Substack, Michael Thunder Phillips, and I will transfer all of this to my YouTube channel, Slam the Gavel, okay? Once friendliness enters the case, it can quietly override other factors. Abuse allegations remain unresolved, and I'll add to that, the judges don't look at evidence. You can have evidence of all this A, B, U, Z, E, and whatever, and these judges don't look at it, and or the opposing counsel, for lack of a better word, hides it from the judge along with the clerks. The clerks can also suppress the evidence, just so you all know. Sometimes you can't always blame the judge. Sometimes it's the clerks. Okay, so I'm adding to that. He continues, ABUZ allegations remain unresolved. Evidence becomes secondary to demeanor. Compliance is mistaken for cooperation. Ooh, that's a big one. Silence is mistaken for stability. A parent who raises no objections, files no motions, and agrees to contact even when harmful can appear ideal. A parent who insists on safety looks adversarial. Isn't this terrible? It's all, yeah. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice. I can just give my opinion or whatever. But it seems like, you know, the parent that raises no objections and files no motions and agrees to contact, even when it's harmful, can appear ideal. And this is still just devastating to the child. Children absorbing the pressure. Here we go. Children feel this dynamic even when it's not spoken aloud. They learn that expressing fear causes conflict. Resistance creates consequences. Silence keeps the peace. Their discomfort complicates the case. Over time, children may comply not because they feel safe, but because they feel responsible for the adult's stress. That is not co-parenting, that is conditioning. I will also add that is also grooming. And that is also, I'm going to add more to this, that is also teaching kids not to be autonomous in their thinking process. These kids coming out of family court, and I hate to say it, but a lot of them that I have seen come out of family court cannot think for themselves. I don't know why. I know why. It's because they are afraid to express fear that will cause conflict, and they're being silent to keep the peace. Okay, so when you're teaching someone to be silent to keep the peace, you're just promoting someone who cannot think for themselves. And this is so important. When they grow up into adulthood, they have got to think for themselves. I just am so over family court. I really feel it should be dissolved. They are destroying these kids' lives as far as being able to think for yourself, having a respect for law enforcement or laws, okay? I'm trying to go over the ones that close to me have experienced. So, good one, no empathy. So they have been groomed and conditioned, and I'm going off of this, not Mike's article, but they have been groomed to have no empathy. So for instance, if we look at my case, okay, I was driving with one of my kids in the car, and there was a poor fellow in the rain on his bicycle on a median, right? So it was pouring down rain, and he had his grocery bags hanging off his bicycle handlebars. And I said, oh my God, I said to the one I was driving around, I said, look at that poor fellow. I mean, can you imagine being in the rain, no car, and you're on your bicycle? And this is just terrible. And the young one replied, that's his problem. It's like, well, maybe it's not his problem, I replied. Maybe there were circumstances that somehow he can't afford a car. Like maybe family court. Or who knows what could have happened in that person's life. Let me go down another rabbit hole. Okay, on top of people not having empathy. I remember working in the ER, and we had this patient who was in a trauma room, screaming his head off. He was awaiting to be transferred to another, we'll say a psychiatric unit, I believe. So we had to listen to this fellow scream his head off, whatever. He was going back to the psych unit, or awaiting for this person's transfer. Okay. Next door in the other trauma room, there was a veteran waiting to be transferred to some veterans hospital. Who waited the longest, do you think? Who waited the longest? Okay, the veteran waited the longest. Isn't that sad? So anyway, as this fellow who was psychiatrically sick, screaming his head off and saying horrible things, one of the nurses said, why do we have to put up with this crap? He's a blah, blah, blah. And I said, we don't know how he was raised. I said, he could have been raised by some 14-year-old mom who had no guidance herself. We don't know how people are raised. And we don't know what position they were put in where they were compromised. Total silence in that ER after I said that. Because we have to have empathy and compassion because we don't know the whole situation. And again, it's just very sad. Let me go back to this article from coming out of that rabbit hole, okay? Why courts rely on the friendly parent metric. The friendly parent standard persists because it simplifies judicial decision-making. It avoids making hard findings about ABUZE. It reduces the appearance of favoritism. It creates a behavioral proxy for best interest. It shifts responsibility into parents rather than the court. But simplicity is not accuracy. In cases involving power imbalance, friendliness is often a performance, not a reflection of safety or care. Isn't that interesting? When cooperation becomes compulsion, at its worst, the friendly parent trap results in forced contact over objections, threats of custody loss for non-compliance, sanctions against protective parents, court-ordered silence about safety concerns, long-term erosion of trust between child and caregiver. The system prioritizes smooth procedure over substantive protection. Like, hello, look at your evidence the parents are putting forth, okay? And I can tell you, okay, if we go back to threats of custody loss for non-compliance. Okay, so this is a big issue, and I think a lot of parents can identify with this when you're in family court and the other parent is really in contempt for, we'll say, withholding the child. Okay, so they're supposed to be in contempt for withholding the child, right? So the judge just gives them a slap on the wrist and really doesn't say even much or even addresses it. So that judge should have been saying, look, you've withheld Johnny twice. Okay, so you're going to, provided there's no child ABUZE going on and documentation of that. So if the judge says you've got to have Johnny there and that parent does not comply again, then they should be seriously held in contempt. But will they comply? Is this enforced? Absolutely not. That's my problem, among many other problems. But these courts are not enforcing any orders. Let's go back to Mike's article. The question courts rarely ask. The friendly parent standard fails because it skips critical inquiry. Is this parent facilitating contact because it is safe or because they are afraid of court consequences? Isn't that scary? Without that distinction, cooperation becomes coercion and compliance becomes survival. Okay, so I'll add to that. If you can avoid family court, don't go in there. What comes next? Okay, this article is part of the Patterns of Family Court, an investigative series under Project System. And that's underlined, Project System. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, because rights that aren't enforced, as I've been saying, aren't rights at all. And in family court, enforcement is often optional. So thank you, Mike Thunder Phillips, for that article. That was written February 1st of 2026, which is called The Friendly Parent Trap, How Cooperation Becomes a Punishment. I'm going to turn off my laptop because my battery is going down the tubes. Okay, so this is the problem with all these laws and things like that. Okay, people are writing laws. There's this law, that law, naming laws after these poor kids, and they're still not being enforced. And chances are a lot of those laws are already in the penal codes of each state. If you go to your state and look up the penal code for, say, custodial interference, you will find that it's in there. And look how old that penal code is, that statute, whatever. Okay, you'll find that it is could possibly be over 30 to 40 years old. And why aren't these being enforced? Possibly because these police officers, state police officers, wherever, they're not trained in this. People will say, they don't need any more training. Oh, yes, they do. I'll tell you why. I had to write up an affidavit. I think I mentioned this in one of my other TikToks, that I will transfer over to Slam the Gavel podcast on YouTube. Please like and subscribe and share. Okay, so I had gone to the police station with this affidavit to have them file it in my file. It's pretty bad when you have a file, okay, with a police department. Anyway, I was explaining it to the officer. He was reading it. He was reading the affidavit. He said, this is all hearsay. And I said, no, this affidavit is not hearsay. I wrote the affidavit. I am explaining what happened. Okay, so if this was hearsay, officer, it would be me saying that I heard this from Jane 2 doors down. So I'm putting this into an affidavit. That doesn't fly because that's hearsay. But you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. I don't know if you can see the horse here. The horse's mouth. I'm just telling you. I don't know why he didn't understand hearsay and the strength of an affidavit. Affidavits are very, very strong. They are like gold. Always document and keep track of dates and times people say things to you. Okay, so when I left there, he understood what hearsay really was, okay? But again, when I explained it to him, I was very respectful and kind because he was a young fellow and he was really cute. But that's beside the point. So what you have to do is I'm going down another rabbit hole. Here we go. This is how it is, okay? With these family court dysfunctions, you have to have affidavits, and they're very powerful from what I've been told, and they are like gold, okay? So fill out your affidavit. Don't sign it yet. Don't date it either yet. I mean, from the time that you're filling out the affidavit. You can put in the affidavit, on this day, on Thursday, January 8th, blah, 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 at 1900 hours, this happened, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what I learned from the notary, I'm just telling you all, is that when you go to submit it to the notary, don't date it yet. Okay, I didn't know that, but I learned that. And obviously don't sign it until the notary has to witness your signature. Okay, now you're creating an affidavit, which is a record. This is great. So when you're going through this family court system, you have got to have things documented very heavily. That's your evidence. Whether it will be looked at or not, that's another story. I talked to a lawyer yesterday. She called me. I won't say who she is, but she was great to talk to. And her issue really wasn't with the family court system. It was kind of in with something else. But we had talked for a good long hour. And she said, wait, what do you mean? Evidence isn't looked at in the family court system? I said, oh, no, not at all. She said, what do you mean? They have to look at evidence. Oh, no, they don't. They don't have to look at evidence. Okay, so here's where education is vital for everybody and their brother and sister and nephew and aunt. Okay, saying that these family courts are operating on their discretion, the judge's discretion. There's no jury there. And she didn't know there was no jury there. I said, no, this is not like criminal court where at least you have a chance. And maybe you don't have a chance. I'm hearing stories from so many parents. I've done 800 plus interviews on Slam the Gavel on my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. I'm also on all major platforms. Okay, so I'm hearing all of this, that parents are shocked and appalled that evidence is not being looked at. They're handing custody over to the wrong parent. The ABUSIVE parent. And they don't care because it's all about the money. I just saw another parent here on TikTok put up a bunch of dollar signs. So yes, it's all about money, and they don't care. Okay, and I said before, I'll say it again. These family court judges don't like you. They don't like you coming into their courtroom. They don't like your family. They don't like your kids. And chances are, they don't like themselves either. Now, I will say, I have had 3 good judges, so I can't lump everybody in with the bad fellows. Now, I've got someone writing, when it's against the state, how do we protect ourselves? That's a very, very good question. All you've got is your evidence. Granted, me personally, I like things to be in affidavit form because they're taken more seriously. That's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. Okay? So I'm not giving any legal advice, but all you can do is try to get them into the record. And then you'll have the judge say, well, this isn't going your way, so you can do this on appeal. And we all know, as parents who have been through family court, appeals take months and months and months and months. Meanwhile, you're losing time with your child. And when they're at that other home with the offensive parent, the offending parent, they're being brainwashed, Stockholm syndromed, and alienated. I'll say it again. So you've got to build a record. That's what I always did. When I was in family court, I'll tell you this is what I was doing with, and I had a female attorney. Okay, she was trying. The problem is the judge was not listening to her. He was chauvinistic. And he was. I'm not making it up. Not all male judges are chauvinistic, okay? Because like I said, I had 3 good ones. They were all male. And one of them was highly good looking. And it was not the president judge. Anyway, I digress. So try to get everything into the record. What I was doing, I would tell my attorney, I said, put me on the witness stand. Just put me on the witness stand. She did. And then she would come up with questions. I mean, we were really working in tandem. I thought we did a great job with me requesting to go up on the witness stand because remember, you're paying a lawyer. They have to work for you. Okay, and I was being reasonable, okay? So I got a lot of stuff on the record. Now you're saying, well, gee, where did your case go? Okay, the case went south because I had won my first false accusation of emotional child abuse in Erie County, OCY. Okay, so I won the first one. So my attorney said, Your Honor, can we go back to 50-50 as we had been for the last 10 years? Okay, that's a red flag. Okay, why are we in court when parents have co-parented for 10 years? Okay, the judge, that's another rabbit hole. So he yelled at her and he said, I have my reasons. And she said, Your Honor, what are your reasons? Because she's done this, that, and the other thing that you have requested. And he yelled at her again, I have my reasons. And she said, but Your Honor, what are your reasons? And he yelled at her again and she sat down like, we're not going to win this. To which I took it to the Superior Court. I think I took it twice to what my kids' wishes were, which were 50-50, as we had been for 10 years. Now, unbelievable. The judge kept everything status quo, and he had made me a non-custodial parent and destroyed the relationships I had with my children. And that's their goal. Because when the opposing attorney and the judge have worked in the DA's department for years, they now have an agenda on the target parent. That's how it was in my case. Okay, So I'm sorry this was kind of scattered. I was worried about my computer pooping out. I'm trying to read an article. I'm going to go plug it in and charge it. So when I do this possibly tomorrow, it won't be so scattered. And I want to say that I'd like to see parents pull together and have moms and dads work together because we have to support each other. I have comforted moms. I've comforted dads. I've comforted grandparents and even attorneys. Okay, like the one I talked to yesterday. She was fantastic to talk to, but again, it was a learning experience for not just her, but for me too. So we're all learning from each other to see how we can fix something that probably is not fixable, like family court. I think possibly we all can agree that it's not fixable. Everyone calls it a broken system, but come on. They got this thing working like a well-oiled piece of machinery. And they've been doing it for decades and decades at the expense of our children. And these opposing attorneys, like the one I had to deal with, I call him tortoiseshell. But he also, in my opinion, is a personality disorder and probably should have a psych eval as well. I think anyone, any attorney or judge working in the family law industry should have psych evals every 18 months. You can tell me your thoughts on that, what you think about that. I know, I agree, enough is enough, I agree. But if they're not going to dissolve family court, put a jury in there, please. I think if, and I know in Texas they can have juries, but for the most part, a lot of us can't. And I think if I had a jury, this case probably would have turned out better. I don't know. But again, my female attorney was tramped all over by a chauvinist pig. That was not her fault. Some people will say, well, my attorney wasn't effective. Well, sometimes there's extraneous circumstances as to why this is happening. That was one of them. So I know this was kind of all over the place. I totally apologize. I won't let that happen again. And I wanted to let you know that Raised by These Wolves, Volume 3, will be coming out February 5th on Amazon. Finally, I have a date for everyone. You can find Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. That was number 1. Number 2 is Raised by These Wolves, Child Trafficking Within the Foster Care and Court Systems, Volume 2. That came out as a bestseller. And if you see the back of it, God help the sheep when the wolf is judged. That's a Danish proverb. I'm really disheartened, but I'm very happy that my book is coming out because you'll see a lot of good stories coming from certain areas in the United States of what's happening in these courtrooms. And there's so many parents that I've had on in the previous chapters. Like I've had my friend Kelly Patton in there. I have had, let me see here, Jim. I've had Jim Schock on there, in there. He's been a repeat in also this book, as well as Kelly, my friend Kelly. And this was a very powerful book, but my publisher said that the third one she believes is very, very powerful. So I will love you and leave you, and I'll try to do this again tomorrow, but a little bit more, not all over the place. Got a lot on my mind. I've got to make a lot of phone calls this morning. So I hope you all have a good day, and we will all talk again. If you have any questions, you can contact me on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com or my YouTube channel, Slam the Gavel. Please like and subscribe and share. And you'll find a lot of stories in there because we've got to tell the stories. The stories are very important. The stories are there to warn others, okay? There's also trauma and healing, and there is other things you can learn from other individuals. So I'll let you go. Have a good morning, and we will all talk soon. Okay, thank you.